The Battle of Brega Ajdabiya Road was a battle during the Libyan Civil War between forces loyal to Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and anti-Gaddafi forces for control of the towns of Brega and Ajdabiya respectively, and the Libyan Coastal Highway between them. This theatre of the war saw a stagnant front forming quickly. By late June, neither the loyalists or rebels were able to advance, and were thus holding firm on their respective sides of the front line. In an effort to break the deadlock, NATO's air force began an intensified bombing campaign of government military positions. By mid-July, however, the situation remained essentially unchanged. Eventually, on 14 July 2011, the rebels started an all-out offensive in an attempt to break the stalemate. However, their attack was repelled and the deadlock continued. Background: on 30 March, following a government counter-offensive, loyalist forces took control of the town of Brega, just west of Ajdabiya. Rebels attempted a counter-attack to take back the town. For 8 days, loyalists and rebels battled for control of Brega. In the end, government troops repelled numerous rebel attacks on the city and managed to push the rebels back to Ajdabiya by 7 April. Exploiting panic amongst the rebels created by a NATO airstrike on a column of rebel tanks to gain the initiative. Following the rebel retreat, government troops consolidated full control over Brega and were preparing a raid against Ajdabiya. The battle. Shelling of Ajdabiya starts by 8 April. Most civilians had left Ajdabiya, but rebels regrouped in the city, which was still in rebel hands. After their forces fled in panic to several different directions near Ajdabiya following a swift government push down the road from Brega using artillery the previous day. During the day, the rebels sent out a scouting party to verify government troop positions, which caused a firefight in which 6 rebels were wounded before they pulled back to Ajdabiya. Later, the loyalists hit the main rebel checkpoint at the western gate of the town with mortar fire, which caused the opposition forces to retreat from the gate to the city center, 7 kilometers away. By evening, pro-Gaddafi forces were 19 kilometers from Ajdabiya and once again at its gates, less than 2 weeks after previously retreating from the town. The British MOD claimed to have destroyed 2 loyalist tanks in airstrikes during the day near the city. Loyalist troops surged into Ajdabiya on 9 April. Rebel forces attempted to go back to Brega, but only got to the university before having to pull back due to intense shelling. After the rebel retreat, loyalist artillery shelled Ajdabiya, most notably the city's western gate, for 30 minutes. Pro-Gaddafi forces had attacked the city from the north, west and south. They had moved through the southern desert overnight to within striking distance of the city. The bombardment killed 3 rebels before it dropped off after what appeared to be a NATO airstrike. Later, however, NATO stated they did not conduct any airstrikes in the vicinity of Ajdabiya during the day. Following the alleged airstrike, government troops pushed into Ajdabiya and spread out across the city, avoiding NATO planes and making it impossible for the pilots to know who to hit. 3 hours of heavy street fighting started, and eventually the rebels were pushed out to the city's outskirts and appeared to have all but lost the town once again. The fighting at one point came dangerously close to the city's hospital, with gunfire being heard several streets away and shells landing nearby. The rebels stated that government forces were aided by sympathizers within Ajdabiya. During the day, a rebel Hind attack helicopter was spotted flying over the city, in defiance of the UN no-fly zone. It was later confirmed to have been shot down by government forces. At sunset, some rebel reinforcements reached the town. The rebels started re-entering the town via the eastern entrance and claimed to be re-establishing control. Smaller loyalist units were still roaming the western parts of the city, and government troops were in firm control of the city's western gate. As night fell, the fighting started up again, with street battles raging for control of the city's main street, Istanbul Street. According to Al Jazeera, loyalists were reported to be in control of the western part of the town while the rebels were in the city center. There were also reports of fighting for the southern part of the town, while rebels were holding their positions in the northern and eastern part. Continued Loyalist push and NATO attacks. On the 10th of April, street fighting continued, with Loyalist forces managing to push closer to the city centre and finally reaching the heart of the town in the afternoon. The government claimed that Loyalist forces had shot down 2 rebel Chinook helicopters who were in violation of the UN Resolution 1973 relating to the no-fly zone. There was no independent confirmation of the claim. However, a rebel spokesman confirmed the previous day that the rebels had sent 2 helicopters from Tobruk to assist in the battle for the city. NATO claimed to have hit 11 tanks in the early part of the day outside Ajdabiya. A Reuters correspondent saw 15 charred corpses of Gaddafi's forces near 6 destroyed armored vehicles. Later, the rebels claimed, and evidently Al Jazeera confirmed, that the NATO attacks helped them push out the loyalists from the city. However, by the evening, shelling from the west of the town was still being heard. On the 11th of April, Al Jazeera and other media reported that loyalist forces had pulled out of the city. However, there was still fighting just to the west of the city, with 3 more rebels being killed during the evening by loyalist rocket fire. Artillery duels. On the 12th of April, Gaddafi forces bombarded the western gate of Ajdabiya with artillery. On the 13th of April, the rebels said they were exchanging rocket fire with the loyalists, who were firing from the front about 40 kilometers east of Brega. Sometime on the next day, the front, about 50 kilometers west of Ajdabiya, came under heavy mortar and rocket fire from loyalist forces. The rebels responded by sending a convoy of some 100 vehicles to the front. At least 2 rebels were reported killed during the fighting. On the 15th of April, AP and CNN reported that a rebel column tried to advance on Brega from Ajdabiya following a rocket barrage. They advanced to positions previously confirmed to be held by loyalists but found no trace of them. However, later CNN confirmed that the rebel advance turned into a rout, with opposition forces retreating to Ajdabiya's western gate after loyalist troops were spotted holding positions just north of the Ajdabiya-Brega road on their flank. During the attempted advance, a rebel fighter was killed and 2 others wounded after a hit-and-run attack from Gaddafi's troops 1 kilometer outside the western gate of Ajdabiya. New rebel attack against Brega sometime after midnight on the 16th of April. The top rebel commander Abdul Fattah Yunus claimed that the rebels managed to reach Brega and were engaged in a fierce battle for the town and would capture it by morning. It was not immediately possible to independently verify the claim. However, by mid-afternoon, it was confirmed that the rebels launched an offensive against Brega. Their first objective was the university campus that was about 5 kilometers from the eastern entrance into the town and an outer line of defense by government troops. During their advance, the rebels were hit hard at a refueling point, midway between Brega and Ajdabiya, by rocket or artillery fire, causing a number of casualties. Still, the rebels continued to advance and made an attempt to storm the university complex. However, their attack was repelled by heavy artillery and they did not manage to enter the town itself. During the first day of fighting, 8 rebels were killed, 4 were missing and 27 were wounded. The rebels had hoped that if they managed to recapture the town they could bring up engineers to repair the oil terminals in Brega so they can make use of them. Loyalists' flanking attack against Ajdabiya on the morning of the 17th of April. Gaddafi forces were shelling the western gate of Ajdabiya and some ground fighting occurred when they outflanked the main fighting group on the edge of Brega from the south. However, Al Jazeera reported continued fighting in the afternoon at Brega, after Yunus had announced the rebel retreat. According to Yunus, NATO had assured the rebels that they took out all the heavy artillery in Brega, but they never really did. After a few hours of skirmishes, loyalist forward units that were engaging rebels on the western outskirts of Ajdabiya pulled back. In the afternoon, more than 30 vehicles of rebel reinforcements arrived into the town, and the rebels positioned themselves in anticipation of a possible direct attack on the city, specifically from the south via the road from Jal. In the evening, the rebels were unsure of where loyalist forces were positioned in the vicinity of Ajdabiya or about the situation on the outskirts of Brega. Stalemate. On the 18th of April, rebels moved out 40 kilometers west from Ajdabiya to midway between it and Brega in response to clear skies for the next 3 weeks, except for a few artillery skirmishes and an occasional NATO airstrike. The rebels and Gaddafi's forces had not confronted each other at all in the Brega Ajdabiya area. On the 23rd of April, rebels claimed that airstrikes on Gaddafi's forces located on the Al-Zaitaniya Al-Swahat road near Ajdabiya reportedly hit 21 army vehicles belonging to Gaddafi's forces. However, there was no independent or NATO confirmation of the claim. On the same day, loyalist forces also shelled the small village of Al-Fallujah, near Ajdabiya. Al Jazeera reported on the 24th of April that loyalists had firmly established themselves in a residential area in Brega with around 8 Grad batteries and a large number of troops. It was also reported that NATO had attacked pro-Gaddafi forces in Maria Karbas, an area northwest of Ajdabiya. Loyalists had apparently been trying to skirt the city and secretly surround it. On the 26th of April, a rebel told Reuters that Gaddafi forces were digging in around Brega to reinforce their positions. He estimated their number at around 3,000 and confirmed that the front line was midway on the road between Ajdabiya and Brega. On the 6th of May, a rebel scouting pickup came too close to loyalist lines and was hit by artillery fire. 3 rebels were killed. On the 9th of May, the rebels claimed that they killed 36 soldiers from Gaddafi's forces and lost 6 of their fighters in a battle between Brega and Ajdabiya. The figures given for the loyalist dead could not be verified independently. 2 days later, a small loyalist raiding party attacked rebel positions 6 kilometers from Ajdabiya, killing 1 and wounding 2 others. According to the head of the local ambulance service and several residents, loyalists launched 3 rockets from an undetermined location into an Ajdabiya neighborhood on the morning of the 12th of May, striking a house, rubbish heap, and several cars. No casualties were reported. On the 13th of May, the Libyan government stated that 18 civilians were killed, including 11 imams, and 50 wounded in a NATO airstrike on a guest house in Brega where the clerics were staying after holding a ceremony in the frontline town. NATO claimed that what their strike hit was a military command and control point. According to Al Jazeera, a Dutch engineer reported that he had built a command bunker for Gaddafi in 1988. At the same coordinates the NATO strike occurred. He stated that the bunker was designed to withstand an atomic strike. Neither claim regarding the casualties has been independently confirmed thus far. On the 19th of May, increased rebel activity was reported between Ajdabiya and Brega. New recruits and ammunition arrived in large numbers at the front lines. On the 20th of May, a relatively small band of rebel fighters launched an attack which included limited artillery fire at Gaddafi's forces at Brega University, an area in which rebels had trouble engaging in before due to Gaddafi's forces' extensive use of artillery shelling. Rebels managed to position themselves past the university to attack it from multiple angles, but Gaddafi's forces were still holding their positions at the university by the end of the day. On the 21st of May, rebels launched an attack on Brega from 6 directions in an attempt to outflank loyalists entrenched there. 2 rebels were killed and 12 were wounded, along with an unknown number of loyalists, according to a field surgeon. The surgeon claimed that the rebels destroyed 2 loyalist vehicles mounted with heavy weapons and captured another 3. Later during the evening, Loyalists counterattacked with 1 rebel killed and 4 wounded in fighting at the Al-Baran checkpoint, on the midpoint between Brega and Ajdabiya. On the 4th of June, NATO launched its first helicopter attack on targets in and near Brega. 1 radar installation and 1 pickup, mounted with an anti-aircraft guns, at a military checkpoint were destroyed. On the 11th of June, NATO reported that surveillance from overhead fighter jets found that Gaddafi's forces dug a wide trench near the front line of Brega and filled it with a black liquid believed to be petroleum or oil. On the 12th of June, soon after anti-Gaddafi uprisings in Zlatan and Zawiya, rebels launched an attack on Brega. A force of 130 rebels attempted to advance on Brega, but were repelled and pulled back to Ajdabiya. 4 of the opposition fighters were killed and 65 wounded during the offensive. On the morning of the next day, the 13th of June, another rebel push was attempted against Brega, and this one too was repulsed with even heavier casualties than the previous attack. 23 to 25 rebels were killed and 26 wounded. The rebels were advancing when they were ambushed by Loyalist forces some 35 kilometers east of Brega. The Loyalists were pretending to surrender, showing a white flag, when they opened fire on the rebels. On the 14th of June, rebels attacked Brega once again with infantry, IFVs and technicals, marking the 3rd day of their offensive. On the 17th of June, a NATO airstrike destroyed 6 rebel pickup trucks, mounted with anti-aircraft guns, near Ajdabiya, wounding 16 rebels. Intensified NATO campaign. On the 24th of June, NATO started launching massive airstrikes on Brega. According to their own reports, they claimed to have destroyed 146 military targets in 3 weeks. However, there was no independent confirmation of the destruction of the targets. The Libyan government claimed that 20 civilians were killed during the first day of attacks. New rebel offensive. On the 9th of July, government troops destroyed the petrochemical plant in Brega, according to a Libyan rebels spokesman. On the 14th of July, the rebels attacked Brega once again, this time armed with refurbished and repaired T-72 tanks and armored personnel carriers, as well as some armed technical trucks. By the next day, the rebels themselves confirmed that their attack had failed and that they had fallen back to their previous positions, where battles with Loyalist forces continued on 3 fronts. Late on the 2nd day of the fighting, rebel forces on a recon mission breached Brega, but pulled back to prepare for a fresh offensive the next day. On the 16th of July, according to some reports, rebel forces managed to enter Brega's outskirts but encountered heavy government shelling and multiple landmines. They were moving slowly because of hundreds of landmines. They were also slowed due to defensive trenches around the city that had been filled with flammable chemicals by retreating Loyalist troops. Government troops had mostly pulled back into the town from its outskirts and left the booby-trap trenches behind. Most opposition troops were reportedly still 20 kilometers east of Brega by the end of the 3rd day. On the 17th of July, heavy street-to-street fighting in residential areas of Brega started. On the 18th of July, rebels announced that the main bulk of Loyalist forces had retreated to Ras Lanuf, while the main group of rebel forces were already behind Brega and were heading towards Bash and Ugala. The rest of rebel forces started cleaning up mines and pockets of Loyalists in Brega. On the 19th of July, following a fierce Loyalist counter-attack that left 110 rebels dead or wounded, opposition forces withdrew east from Brega. By the end of July, the city was still in control of the Gaddafi army and the rebels' effort to take Brega had stalled. They were reported to be 20 kilometers away from Brega and the battle was back to the Brega Ajdabiya road. On the 31st of July, rebels said that they were planning a new offensive on Brega, which was still held and defended by 3,000 well-armed Loyalists. On the 5th of August, the rebels claimed to had captured a hill overlooking part of the town. On the 9th of August, the rebels launched a second attempt to take the town. According to rebel commander Faraj Moftad, rebel fighters were able to penetrate the residential area once again. By the evening of the 11th of August, a National Liberation Army spokesman in Benghazi announced that the new Brega residential district was captured. A few hours later, in a telephone call with the Associated Press correspondent, rebel commander Muhammad al-Rajali announced from Ajdabiya that Brega has fallen under opposition control. These claims could not be immediately verified.